The relentless sun beat down on the cracked earth of Pine Ridge in the remote Montana territory as Sarah Brennan trudged along the dusty path, carrying 2 heavy wooden buckets of water. At 27, her face already bore the marks of a hard life, and her hunched shoulders revealed years of bearing burdens no one else in her household wanted to carry. Her worn leather boots barely protected her feet from the scorching ground, and sweat ran down her forehead as she struggled against the weight that cut into her calloused fingers. Sarah was known throughout the small settlement as the old maid of the Brennan family, the woman who had passed the age considered proper for marriage. According to the sharp tongues of neighboring women, she wasn't fit for much of anything. Her family treated her more like hired help than a daughter, constantly reminding her that she was a burden, another mouth to feed, who brought no money into the household. Every day she woke before dawn to fetch water from the distant creek, handle domestic chores, and endure the constant humiliations from a mother who made no secret of her disappointment in having a daughter she considered worthless. That particularly sweltering morning, Sarah felt the weight of the buckets cutting even deeper into her hands. She stopped for a moment to rest under a scraggly pine tree, trying to gather strength to continue the walk back to her cabin. It was then she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching on the trail. She looked up and saw a man mounted on a sturdy bay horse, around 32 years old, with sun-weathered skin and a thick beard that gave him a mysterious air. His clothing was simple: buckskin trousers, a cotton shirt, and a wide-brimmed felt hat shielding his face from the merciless sun. "Morning, ma'am," he said in a deep, calm voice as he dismounted. "Can I help you with those buckets?" Sarah was surprised. She wasn't accustomed to kindness from strangers, especially men. She tried to politely refuse, but he had already approached and taken the buckets from her hands with an ease that demonstrated the strength in his arms. "Are you sure, sir? You needn't trouble yourself," she murmured, lowering her gaze, as she had learned to do in the presence of men. "Where are you headed, ma'am?" he asked, ignoring her protest, and beginning to walk alongside her. "Toward the settlement, sir. I live there," Sarah replied, still surprised by this unexpected courtesy. During the walk, the man introduced himself as Daniel Blackwood, explaining that he had recently arrived to work as foreman at the Thornton Ranch, the largest property in the territory. Sarah knew the reputation of Marcus Thornton, a wealthy, powerful, and extremely reclusive man who was rarely seen in the settlement and ruled his lands with an iron fist. Employment at the Thornton Ranch was considered an achievement, as the owner was known for paying well but demanding much from his workers. Daniel carried the buckets all the way to the door of Sarah's humble cabin, a simple log construction with a shake roof housing her parents, and 3 younger siblings. "Thank you so much for the help," she said, attempting to take the buckets back. "It's been my pleasure helping you, Miss Sarah," he responded. There was something in the way he said her name that made her feel a strange warmth in her chest. "May I know your full name?" Sarah hesitated for a moment. "Sarah Brennan," she said finally. "Thank you for the company, Miss Sarah Brennan. Perhaps our paths will cross again." He mounted his horse and continued toward the ranch, leaving Sarah standing at her cabin door with her heart inexplicably racing. That afternoon, while washing clothes in a wooden tub in the yard, Sarah couldn't get Daniel out of her head. There was something different about him, a genuine kindness she rarely experienced. When her mother, Martha Brennan, returned from the trading post, Sarah casually mentioned the encounter. "What man was that?" the woman asked suspiciously. "The new foreman at the Thornton Ranch, Ma. He helped me with the buckets," Sarah replied. Martha frowned. "Sarah, it's not enough that you're an old maid. Now you want to give folks something to gossip about. A man doesn't help a woman without wanting something in return. Keep your distance from that fellow." But Sarah knew she had felt something different in that encounter, something her mother, embittered by years of hardship, couldn't understand. The following days brought a routine Sarah had never experienced before. Whenever she went out to fetch water or headed to the trading post, she encountered Daniel on the trail. He always offered to help, carrying her heavy bundles, or simply keeping her company during the solitary walks. Sarah, accustomed to being treated like a burden by her own family, found this respectful attention like balm for her wounded soul. Daniel was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. When he saw Sarah struggling with firewood for the stove, he'd stop his horse and load it up. If he found her heading to the trading post with a heavy basket, he'd offer to carry it on his saddle. Small gestures that, in Sarah's hard, Scrabble life, shone like stars in the dark sky over Montana. In Little Pine Ridge, nothing went unnoticed. Tongues began wagging, initially in discreet whispers on cabin porches, then in outright gossip at the general store. "Did you see how that new foreman looks at Sarah Brennan?" commented Ida Patterson, the settlement's most gossipy seamstress. "What man would be interested in that plain thing?" responded Margaret Cooper, the storekeeper's daughter. "Some folks are born lucky," added another neighbor, all of them trying to find a logical explanation for a transformation they considered impossible to occur naturally. The encounters between Sarah and Daniel became more obvious and frequent. He didn't just help with heavy work, but began showing genuine interest in her life, asking about her dreams, fears, and hopes. For Sarah, who had never been heard or valued, these conversations were a precious gift. She discovered Daniel had a sharp intelligence and a worldview far beyond what she expected from a simple ranch foreman. He spoke of books he'd read, places he'd traveled, and ideas about improvements he intended to implement at the Thornton Ranch. Sarah, who could barely read beyond the basics, listened fascinated to these conversations that opened windows to worlds she'd never imagined. He never made her feel inferior. On the contrary, he valued her practical wisdom and strength of character, qualities few recognized. But gossip reached Martha Brennan through meddling neighbors who knocked on her door one sweltering afternoon. "Martha, do you know your daughter's been seeing that foreman from the Thornton Ranch?" asked Ida Patterson, barely concealing her pleasure at bringing scandalous news. "What are you saying?" Martha frowned. "It's true. Everyone's talking about it," Margaret added. Sarah, entering the room with a basin of wet laundry, froze. Her face instantly burned with shame and fear. She knew her mother's explosive temper and understood a storm was about to break. "Is this true, Sarah?" Martha demanded, eyes flashing with anger. "He only helped me a few times, Ma. It's nothing improper," Sarah whispered. "Nothing improper? An unmarried woman seeing an unknown man out there? Since when have you become one of those women of questionable reputation?" Martha shouted. At that precise moment, a discreet clearing of a throat at the door interrupted the heated argument. All heads turned simultaneously. Standing there, hat in hand, was Daniel, with a serious expression and determination in his eyes that suggested he had heard part of the humiliating conversation. But what Daniel was about to do would leave not only Sarah but the entire settlement of Pine Ridge completely shocked. No one was prepared for the words that would come from his mouth. "Afternoon, ladies," Daniel said, with formality that contrasted his simple appearance. "I've come to speak with Sarah's parents about a very important matter." The silence that followed was thick, like fog over the mountain valleys at dawn. Daniel took a deep breath and fixed Martha Brennan with steady eyes. "Mrs. Brennan, Mr. Brennan," he began, his voice calm yet commanding, "I have come to ask for Sarah's hand in marriage." The room fell utterly silent. The only sound was the faint creak of the wooden floorboards beneath Daniel's boots. Martha's jaw dropped, and her eyes widened with disbelief. James Brennan, usually loud and quick to voice his opinion, merely froze in astonishment. You want to marry her?" Martha stammered, her voice trembling with a mix of incredulity and indignation. "But she's plain. She is strong, intelligent, and hard-working," Daniel interrupted firmly. "Qualities far rarer than beauty alone, and qualities I value above all else. I want to spend my life with her, and I am asking for your blessing." James Brennan, ever the practical one, scratched his head. "Well, she is good with the chores, and she can handle a farm, but—" "Enough," Daniel said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "This is not a matter for debate. I love Sarah, and I intend to marry her with or without permission, though I would prefer it with your blessing." Martha's face turned red with fury. She opened her mouth as if to yell, then paused, suddenly aware of the weight of Daniel's words. Her husband, usually quick to side with her, seemed uncharacteristically quiet, his brows furrowed. Sarah, standing frozen in the corner with her hands clutching her apron, felt a strange flutter of disbelief and excitement in her chest. Could this truly be happening? Could the man who had been nothing more than a distant helper on the ranch now want to spend his life with her? Daniel approached Sarah and took her hand gently. "Sarah, will you marry me?" he asked, his gaze soft but unwavering. Tears sprang to her eyes, but not from sadness. This was hope, recognition, and an affirmation of her worth all rolled into one. "Yes, yes, Daniel." "I will," she whispered, her voice trembling. Martha gasped audibly, a sound of outrage and disbelief that echoed through the small cabin. You mean to make her our daughter-in-law? Are you mad?" Quote. Daniel turned to her unshaken. "I am in love, Mrs. Brennan, and I am certain of my decision. Sarah is the woman I want to marry, and no amount of gossip or social expectation will change that." For a moment, the room was silent again, the kind of tense silence that follows a shock no one is ready to process. Sarah's father, still unsure how to react, finally muttered, "Well, if she makes him happy." Daniel nodded politely. "She will. I promise." Over the next few days, word spread through Pine Ridge like wildfire. The entire settlement was abuzz. No one could believe it. Sarah Brennan, the plain, quiet woman who had been dismissed, ignored, and ridiculed, was now engaged to the new foreman of the Thornton Ranch, a man strong, capable, and by all accounts respectable in every sense. Gossip, as it always does, took on a life of its own. "Have you heard? Sarah Brennan's going to marry the foreman," one neighbor whispered. "They say he's handsome, but why would he want her?" Another replied, shaking her head. "Some say he's just lonely." A third suggested. Sarah, however, paid little attention. Her world had shifted. She felt a sense of dignity and recognition she had never known, and, most importantly, she felt loved for who she was, not for what she could do for others or how she could meet society's expectations. Daniel continued to show his devotion in small, everyday gestures. He helped her carry firewood, tended to the garden beside her, and spent evenings teaching her to read more fluently, a skill she had struggled with due to the lack of formal education. Despite her growing happiness, a subtle unease lingered in the air. Pine Ridge was a small settlement, and society was unforgiving. Not everyone would accept this match. Whispers, jealous glances, and subtle slights began to follow Sarah wherever she went. The town, which had ignored her existence for years, now scrutinized her with envy and suspicion. Yet for the first time in her life, Sarah did not cower or retreat. She walked taller, her back straighter, her gaze unflinching. She had been humiliated and overlooked for years, but now she had the chance to live a life of dignity, respect, and love. And deep down, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. With Daniel by her side, no obstacle, no gossip, no social expectation, no hardship could diminish her newfound confidence and hope. As the days passed, preparations for the wedding began. Invitations were sent to Pine Ridge and surrounding settlements. Sarah, under Daniel's gentle guidance, began learning the basics of hosting, planning, and managing the simple but meaningful details of the ceremony. The day of the wedding arrived with a crisp Montana sunrise, painting the valley with golden light. The small church in Pine Ridge was filled with friends, family, and neighbors, all eager or curious to witness the union of the once overlooked Sarah Brennan and the diligent, respected foreman, Daniel Blackwood. When Sarah walked down the aisle, wearing a modest but elegant dress, all eyes turned. Whispers swept through the room, some of surprise, some of envy, some of genuine admiration. Daniel, standing tall at the altar, watched her approach, his heart full of unspoken emotions, and when their hands met and vows were exchanged, the room held its breath. This was not just the union of two people in love. It was the beginning of a transformation, of Sarah's life, of the social fabric of Pine Ridge, and of the destiny that awaited them both beyond the horizon of the Montana mountains. Little did they know, the quiet happiness they had found in each other would soon be tested in ways neither could yet imagine. For secrets lay hidden in the heart of the Thornton Ranch that would change everything. The first weeks of married life at the Thornton Ranch were a mixture of wonder, adjustment, and quiet learning for Sarah. The vast Montana landscape stretched endlessly before her eyes, a constant reminder of the life she had never imagined. She woke each morning to the soft rustle of wind through the tall grasses, the distant lowing of cattle, and the smell of fresh bread baking in the cabin kitchen. Her cabin now alongside Daniel's. Daniel, for his part, proved to be the same man she had married, kind, hard-working and attentive, yet now carrying the additional weight of foreman responsibilities for the entire ranch. Each day he rose early to oversee the ranch hands, inspect the livestock, and negotiate with suppliers. Despite the physical and mental strain, he never failed to make time for Sarah, sharing quiet moments in the mornings over coffee or at night under the stars. Sarah learned to embrace the rhythms of ranch life, discovering satisfaction in the simple, purposeful work of maintaining their home and tending to the garden behind the cabin. She watched with quiet admiration as Daniel handled his duties with skill and integrity, earning the respect of the workers. Slowly, she began to feel a sense of belonging, a confidence that came not from wealth or social standing, but from knowing she was valued and loved. Yet, despite the calm of everyday life, Sarah noticed subtle tensions she could not explain. Occasionally, Daniel would receive private messages, letters, or visits from men and women who spoke in hushed tones, their eyes darting nervously as if aware of secrets they could not reveal. He rarely spoke of these encounters, and when she asked, he would only offer a vague reassurance. "Just matters of the ranch, Sarah. Nothing for you to worry about." But Sarah's curiosity was awakened. Though she trusted Daniel completely, she could not shake the feeling that there was more to the story than he let on. The man she had come to know as humble and devoted might, she sensed, carry a past that he had chosen to keep hidden. One late afternoon, 7 months after their wedding, Sarah was hanging freshly washed laundry on the line when she noticed unusual activity at the main ranch house. Elegant carriages rolled along the dusty road, kicking up clouds of dirt in their wake, and well-dressed men and women alighted with a purposeful air. They moved through the property with a sense of urgency that contrasted sharply with the usual quiet of the ranch. Sarah's brow furrowed. She returned to her chores, trying to appear unconcerned, but she could not ignore the strange energy that seemed to ripple through the air. Hours later, Daniel returned for lunch, his face marked by a tension Sarah had never seen before. "Has something happened?" she asked carefully, serving the stew she had prepared. Daniel hesitated, stirring his food absent-mindedly. Finally, he spoke. "Mr. Thornton is very ill. Specialist doctors have come from Denver. The situation is serious." Sarah crossed herself instinctively. "May the Lord protect him." "Is it very serious?" Daniel nodded, his hands trembling slightly. "He's had heart problems for months, but he is stubborn. He only allowed help when the situation became critical." The news filled Sarah with unease. Marcus Thornton, a solitary and respected figure in the community, was a man whose death would affect not only the ranch's operations, but the livelihoods of dozens of families, including Daniel's. Questions crowded her mind. Who would inherit the ranch? What changes might follow? In the days that followed, the ranch became tense and expectant. Routine work continued, but whispers spread among the workers, their faces shadowed with concern. Lawyers and distant relatives arrived, drawn by the scent of fortune and inheritance, while the air seemed thick with anticipation and unspoken motives. A week later, Daniel was summoned to the main house for the first time since the rancher's condition worsened. He left at dawn with a worried expression and did not return until nightfall. When he finally entered the cabin, his usual calm demeanor was replaced by a weighty gravity that made Sarah's heart sink. "Daniel," she asked softly, "what happened?" He looked at her, eyes shadowed with emotion. "The rancher passed away 2 hours ago." Sarah instinctively crossed herself again, murmuring a prayer. "May he rest in peace." She paused, then asked hesitantly, "But why did he want to speak with you privately?" Daniel took a deep breath, as if bracing himself. "He wanted me to know the truth before he died." Sarah's stomach dropped. "What truth?" Quote, For a long moment, Daniel's eyes searched hers, revealing fear, determination, and a weight of responsibility that seemed almost unbearable. Then he spoke, each word deliberate and heavy. "My full name is Daniel Blackwood Thornton. I'm Marcus Thornton's son." The revelation hit Sarah like a lightning bolt. The humble, quiet man she had married, the man who carried water, tended fields, and never boasted, was not just the foreman. He was the heir to the greatest fortune in the territory, the son of the rancher whose death had shaken the land. Her mind raced, questions tumbling over one another. How had she never suspected? Was the foreman a man of wealth all along? Why had he hidden this truth? And most immediately, how would this change their lives? Daniel reached across the table, gently taking her hand. "It's a long story, Sarah. My mother was a simple woman. She worked for the rancher before I was born. When she became pregnant, he dismissed her. I was raised apart, learning about my roots only recently. I wanted to understand him, to know my history, not for revenge, but for closure." Sarah listened, astonished, as the pieces began to fall into place. The private meetings, the careful secrecy, the quiet competence and insight he had shown at the ranch, it all made sense now. "And our wedding?" she asked softly, her voice trembling. "Was that part of the plan?" Daniel's grip tightened, eyes earnest. "No, Sarah. Meeting you was the only unexpected event in this story. I married you because I saw your strength, your dignity, your true self. My love for you was real, and it remains so." The revelation changed everything, yet in the quiet of the cabin, Sarah felt something else as well, a deep, abiding sense of partnership and trust. Together, they had weathered hardships, learned to rely on one another, and now faced a future far larger than either had imagined. Daniel continued, his voice steady but heavy. "The rancher formally recognized me as his son in his will. I am the heir. But nothing has to change between us. I am still the man you married." Quote. Sarah felt the ground shift beneath her feet, not from fear, but from possibility. The woman who had been overlooked, humiliated, and dismissed now stood on the brink of a new life, alongside a husband who was both devoted and extraordinary in ways she had never known. As the night settled over the cabin, Sarah realized the truth. Her life would never be the same. Yet, in that realization, there was not fear, but hope, courage, and a quiet determination to meet the challenges ahead with the same dignity she had carried through years of struggle.